This morning I am in San Diego talking with Ruth Levor, who is a reference librarian at the Legal Research Center of the University of San Diego. Ruth, it is our custom to begin by asking about you as a person as opposed to just a colleague. And could you tell us a little bit about your life, both when perhaps today and even when you were younger?
Oh, certainly. Be happy to. Stop me if I go on too long. Today I am in my phased retirement here at the University of San Diego, where I've been since 1992, I think. And I came here as the associate director to Nancy Carroll Carter. And I served under her for probably about 18 years. And then I had the great pleasure of serving as associate director under our recently departed dear friend Carl Grubin. And just this year, when I hit the milestone age of 70, I stepped down from that position and took advantage of the university's very generous opportunity of phased retirement. And I have turned over all of the administrative responsibilities to our next wonderful generation of librarians. And I come in for half a day and serve at the reference desk, which is my original love and really is, for me, the essence of what brought me to librarianship. So now I have more time and energy to devote to the rest of my life, which includes a wonderful family spread across this United States, 2 sons and a daughter, all married. My son in Seattle is working for Microsoft, and he has 2 sons of his own. I'll see if I can get their ages. Sage is 16 and Isaac is 10, almost 11. And my second son, Ben, lives in the Boston area with his wife and 2 children. Clara, who my first grandchild, who is now preparing for college. She's applying to a lot of colleges, and I can't believe all that time has passed. And
You stick around and that happens.
I know. I remember when I first held her, and she was my first grandchild, and it just felt like she took that tiny fist and just reached in and grabbed my heart. It was just, it's the start of a wonderful phase of my life, and now she's going off to college. And her younger brother, Jesse, is 14. And Ben works as a professional pianist in the Boston area. He plays with the Boston Pops, and he has lots of other gigs as well, does a lot of live shows and teaches at the Concord Academy and at Brandeis. And my baby, my daughter Maya, is here in San Diego. She brought her husband Ted with her from Cincinnati when we all moved out. He wasn't her husband then. And they live within 4 miles of me, and she is a PhD. Her PhD is in psychology, and her field is what they call human factors. And if I were to explain that to our watchers, that would be the end of the interview, because it takes quite a while. But
someone would be an expert and sit there and second guess everything you said, too.
Yes.
You never know.
Yes. So all of these people, fill my life. As well as my community. I've been here for close to 25 years now, and I have a wonderful community here, both in the Jewish community and in my my commuting community. I used to take the train to work every day, and we have a whole group of very good friends that do our things together and our crafts together and theater and the like. I have lived also in a number of areas in the United States. I was actually born in Cincinnati, Ohio. My parents were German immigrants who came here prior to the United States involvement in World War II to escape Hitler in Germany. And my father was one of 5 students who were studying in the Reformed Rabbinical Seminary in Berlin, and who were brought to the United States by the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And at the time I was born, he was serving in the Air Force in the Pacific. I have in my baby book the telegram announcing to him the birth of his daughter. And he served throughout the United States as a chaplain on college campuses for the Hillel Association. So we lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. We lived on the Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. Then we moved to Ohio University, not the Ohio State, but Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. And from there we moved to Long Island, where he was the Hillel director at Hofstra and Adelphi universities until his retirement. So all of those parts of the United States are part of my experience. When I married, my husband went to the Hebrew Union College as a student in Cincinnati. So back I went to Cincinnati, and that's where my law librarianship career began, in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I had my family and raised them. The boys were born earlier, but I was actually born in Cincinnati. And stayed there until the beautiful West Coast beckoned me.
Well, I thought when you talked about your daughter, you'd say she was living in Florida, because here you are in San Diego. You have a son in Seattle, and another one in Boston. I figured, well, you've got to have someone out there in Florida someplace.
I had to keep one with me.
Well, that's probably just as well.
Yes, we've actually never been separated, and that's geographically.
Oh, that's nice.
That is nice, yes.
I have a son who actually lives in Olympia. He moved out when
that's
my late wife and I
wonderful.
moved there, and so it's nice to have him close by. In fact, he and his wife actually live in my house now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Which is large, and they have the upstairs to themselves. And Robert loves the rent. It's not nearly what you pay in a real place.
Correct. That's terrific.
And I find it useful to have the companionship.
Exactly.
Especially if something at my age where I would end up on the floor, the cats wouldn't be able to do much.
Exactly.
One of them might. Well, speaking of you as a person, can I sort of follow up on that and ask a little bit about if you have any particular passions or hobbies or special interests that sort of occupy time, which you will soon have more of now that every day is going to be Saturday morning.
Exactly. Well, my phased retirement goes on for another couple of years, so I'm easing into this and enjoying it very much. I think my passions and hobbies are very stereotypical. I knit.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, it's wonderful, and I have a whole community of fellow knitters as well. What librarian isn't going to tell you that they read? And I belong to 2 book clubs. And I love getting in the outdoors here. I just posted on Facebook a picture of the sunrise in my backyard, and my friends from New York and Ohio all reacted with, well, no wonder you don't come back here.
You forgot to mention it's a little hotter perhaps in the summer, although depending
Well,
on where you are, and
right.
if you're close to the ocean, it's not that bad here in the summer.
No, it's not. It's not. No, it's very temperate here. So it's not like the humidity of Cincinnati or the East Coast. I went to New York in June, and it was very difficult for me because it was so hot. And then, of course, another passion is travel. Mm-hmm. I started traveling again, and I've been to Machu Picchu in Peru. I've been to China twice. I went recently to Italy to a cooking class in an old palazzo overlooking the Adriatic, and then spent a week in an Airbnb in Florence and took tours around the countryside. And the next big trip that I've planned is Morocco. And I'm going with a tour that will focus on art and on Jewish history.
It all sounds like you're going to have a lot of fun on those trips. You've already had some.
Yes, yeah.
And of course then you get to travel to see the grandchildren.
Right.
And maybe the next few years, who knows, there may be great-grandchildren coming along.
Oh, my goodness.
Then it begins all over, huh?
Then it begins all over,
Yeah.
I'm pretty familiar with both the Boston and Seattle areas now.
Oh, that's wonderful, yeah. Seattle is not quite as temperate as San Diego, but, it's not too bad up there.
Very good for your complexion, that's
Is that
what I
they
always say.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Wow.
my family lives in the suburbs in Bellevue,
Yeah.
and it's very lovely there.
It's a very nice part of the area, actually,
Mm-hmm.
east of the lake that borders the east side of Seattle itself.
Right, we were down there on Lake Washington, right?
Yeah. Well, sort of moving on to you as a colleague, Ruth, can I ask about your degrees? I know you have 3 of them. Could you tell us what they are and where you got them?
Sure. So I actually started out at the appropriate age when I was a youngster at Queens College in New York City. And for my junior year, I took a year abroad and went to Israel. Mm-hmm. And on my group of American students, I met a young man who was planning to become a rabbi. And when we came back, we married and started a family. And I dropped out of college for quite a while. Mm-hmm. So by the time I went back to finish college, I was living in Cincinnati, and I was the mother of 3, I guess, by then. Yes, all 3 were born before I went back to college. And so I went back to the University of Cincinnati, mm-hmm. and I had taken a lot of different language courses, so I put those credits all together and had a major in linguistics. Mm-hmm. And so that's my bachelor's degree. And I really wanted to go to library school, but there wasn't any program right in Cincinnati. Cincinnati mm-hmm. does not have a library school program. And this may sound like a leap, but so I went to law school instead. I think I was inspired by some other women I knew, and this was kind of a coming of age for...
You're the transition where there weren't too many women going into the legal profession.
That's correct. So in the classes before me, women had been the minority. By then, we were coming closer to 50%. Mm-hmm. But it was also a psychological and emotional change, because I'm also the transition of perhaps goals for mm-hmm. Young women. And I certainly always lived in my mind and in the pressure of a society with the goal of wife and mother. And so this was a big leap. And actually, during my first year of law school, my marriage ended, but I was able to continue on as a single mother.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 4 years instead of 3, but I do have a JD from the University of Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And then I practiced for a couple of years, but I did realize that I could commute across the Ohio River to northern Kentucky. And the University of Kentucky sent up professors from its librarianship program to teach courses in the facility of the University of Northern Kentucky.
That's just a close-in suburb of Cincinnati.
It
itself.
is.
Yeah.
It is. It's just so I would go after work, so I was already close to the river, and I would just hop on the bridge and across the river and take my classes at night.
Mm-hmm.
You had to take 1 or 2 classes on campus, and so somehow, I don't remember how I worked this out, but I did.
You figured it out.
I figured it out somehow. As I say, the kids were getting older, so they were probably, the boys started college. My oldest son went off to Harvard when I graduated from law school. So by the time I went to library school, probably the second one had gone off to the University of North Texas.
So they weren't exactly so young that you'd have child protective services on your case
No,
if you
no.
let them be latchkey kids.
No. So somehow, as we say, I figured it out,
Mm-hmm.
and I got my degree in librarianship from the University of Kentucky.
Sort of a close place to go, as it turned out.
Yes.
At least for most of your classes.
Yes, right.
You mentioned that you actually practiced a bit, and I
I did.
remember looking in your background in preparation for our chat today. You were worked as a clerk for a judge for a while.
I did. A wonderful gentleman named Robert L. Black.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
And then you were a associate attorney for a law firm of, was it Bettman and Donenfeld?
Donenfeld, correct.
Donenfeld.
Right. So that was a very small firm.
Uh-huh.
And Mariana Brown Bettman was one of the 2 named partners, and really the one who hired me.
Mm-hmm.
She was married to a municipal court judge, Gilbert Bettman, and between the 2 of them, they did various types of civil work. She was really interested in medical malpractice, mm-hmm. and I assisted in a number of those cases. And then, it's kind of a walk-in firm, so I did a little bit of probate, and I even remember representing a youngster in court, and I did some divorce work as well. So whatever.
Sounds like they had a pretty general practice.
Yes.
Then.
Yes, they did. They did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were there for a while, and then in 1989, if my notes are correct, you accepted a position back at the University of Cincinnati as head of circulation for the law school library.
Exactly. That's
Can you tell us about not only that position, but perhaps before we move that far, you already got the library degree, so somewhere along the way, or do you?
I think that I was still in library school
Okay.
when I began, because I do remember sneaking my notes in to study for some final exams.
So you returned, you may not have quite had the library degree, but you decided to work at in the law librarianship field. Can you tell me a little bit about the process by which you decided to move from the practice of law to our niche?
certainly. Well, they had a little, as libraries tend to do, they had a little staffing disaster at the University of Cincinnati. And thankfully, I don't remember the details of it. I actually had a classmate who worked at the University of Cincinnati, a library school classmate, and she was doing acquisitions. And she brought me in and introduced me to the inimitable Taylor Fitchett. Taylor was the director of the library, a Southern Belle if there ever was one. And Taylor and I like to think that we hit it off. And I don't remember the process. I don't remember perhaps, I don't remember if it was an official librarianship position. I think I began as what they used to call then a contract worker. It was one of those arrangements that I think is not legal now, where you hire someone. I think I earned about $10.50 an hour. But it was...
Probably had no real fringe benefits.
I didn't start out with fringe benefits.
Yeah.
No, it was certainly a financial sacrifice for me. But a lot of my classmates in library school were already working in libraries. And I had no library experience. And this was such a good fit, to go back to my alma mater. To work in the library, and to get the experience that I needed, that I think I made the right decision, to take that financial hit, and to do that until, I don't know if there was a hiring freeze or really, I can't remember all of the details about that, but I ultimately ended up with a different position there. But this was good to get my start in circulation. I'm pretty sure I did serve on the reference desk as well from the start.
I would imagine just about all the librarians had a crack at the reference desk.
I would think so too.
Yeah.
I don't know if we were one of those libraries that had any tech services people out there. I just don't have that memory. I do remember, scheduling issues and finding somebody to take the late evening hours, finding student workers to take the late evening hours. So it gave me a lot of good experience working with student workers and doing, a little bit of administrative type of work with scheduling and, how circulation gets involved in everything public services that goes on in the library.
Yes.
And I have to start in that respect with the wonderful story of Taylor Fitchett's toy rooms. Have you heard about Taylor Fitchett's toy rooms? So I had never seen this before, but Taylor had this wonderful practice of we had a separate little room for our human rights collection, the Urban Morgan Human Rights Collection. And that room was smaller, and it was set off from the rest of the library by a corridor. And so she set that up as a playroom with all kinds of games during finals period. And she'd also bring in warm drinks if it was the winter time, cooler drinks in the summer, and snacks and the like. I mean, she broke every, old-fashioned traditional library rule. And it meant a lot to the students. They had Play-Doh, and they had, beanbag tic-tac-toe, and they had a bunch of very childish games that they could relieve their stress by engaging in. And I bring it up because, of course, as head of circulation, you got involved in setting all that up. And somehow the news media got a hold of this, and they did a piece on it. And then, I can't remember, Taylor will probably correct this if she sees it and it's wrong, but I don't know if it was the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, but something national came in, and we got national coverage for it, which was great, except for, of course, some of the more stuffy faculty who thought that it, wasn't dignified enough. And it even does tie in with the Roy Mursky story, because during my time there, I went to a midwinter conference. We used to have those midwinter conferences, and I went to one at Loyola of Los Angeles, and it was about government information, because I was getting into a different position at that time, which was government documents librarian. And one of the presenters was Roy Mursky. And I'm not quite sure why I went up and introduced myself to him, whether it was just I was trying to network or whether I had a question for him after his presentation. But he looked at my name tag, and of course it said University of Cincinnati, and he drew himself up to his full height.
Which wasn't very high.
Yeah. And said, "Oh, yes, that's the place with the toy room."
Oh, so he was proving he'd read that newspaper, or at least heard
yes,
something.
and he probably was aligning himself a little bit with the more stuffy professors who thought it was undignified.
Well, maybe so, but I recently had occasion to visit Yale Law School to do a couple of these oral history interviews there. And on the shelf in the reading room are a lot of games and a lot of movies for people to just take and bring back. And so that if a school of that reputation can allow toys of that sort for their students, certainly the University of Cincinnati ought to be able to do the same thing.
Well, I just saw recently that our librarians had put out a couple of Rubik's Cubes and a couple of stress balls, and I took a picture of it and I sent it to Taylor, and I said, everything old is new again.
That's the way it sometimes is. The cycle repeats. Especially in a law school setting where you have a 3-year cycle of the students. So,
exactly.
In 2 years they don't remember anything.
That's right. And we have always actually had what we call a popular law collection with movies that can be checked out. Yeah. And of course now Carl had instituted the practice of having warm drinks during finals as well.
So he borrowed what you must have suggested from Taylor's.
I don't know. It may have come up all on his own. I don't take credit, but I do give Taylor a lot of credit for being very forward-thinking.
Well, that's sort of a nice segue into the next question I wanted to ask, and that is if you have anybody that you consider to be a mentor from your early salad days in the field.
Those are my wonderful mentors. I mean, Taylor not only was willing to take in someone without any library experience, but she also became just very personally involved, which she didn't have to do, and we went to lunch together a lot, and I just got a lot of good advice, and she was always trying to give me projects that would expand my range of experience so that I could build my resume. I remember being given some responsibility for a staff retreat, and I see now in retrospect, how that helped me build a background for management, because aside from perhaps a required course in management in library school, there's not much that that you're taught or that you do any kind of internship in, as far as management is concerned. And of course, my latest, my dear friend Carl Gruben, I think he mentored me on the other end of my career. That he he knew that I was coming to the end of my career, and that's a process too that nobody really prepares you for. Now we have a new group, a new caucus in AALL.
That's right.
Of retiring and retired law
Just getting
librarians.
organized.
And I hope that can be a focus for them to help folks with this transition. But I have to say, and I'm only just now, with the recent loss of dear Carl, starting to reflect, and I thank you for this opportunity to reflect, but I believe that in many ways that he really nurtured that part. He would kiddingly say, we're going to, we've hired these brilliant, and they are brilliant, younger librarians, and you and I are going to sit back and watch them run the library, and that kind of thing, kind of making it okay to be contemplating that, and also I think cooperating in mentoring those young people who have now stepped into the void in a big way, in an unexpected way, with the loss of Carl, and are entirely capable and doing a fantastic job. So I would say that Carl was a mentor too, and I do have to mention one other lady. Her name was Carol Meyer. And she was the Hamilton County Law Librarian, and she was quite a character. But she was the law librarian in the library, which was in the courthouse, when I was clerking for Judge Black. And so I would go up to the law library and do my work, and I got to know Carol not well. It was kind of a quirky place. But later on, when I was practicing law, I would still continue to do legal research there. And when I had made the decision to make this switch, and I announced it to Carol Meyer, I got enveloped in the biggest bear hug that anyone could ever hope. She was a big lady, and she was very welcoming, and took me out to lunch, and I appreciated that. That welcoming into the professional community. And there's one more person, another departed colleague, departed way too young, and her name was Cynthia Anino. And Cynthia was also a classmate of mine in library school, and we ultimately hired Cynthia. I believe she was in technical services. I believe she became our acquisitions librarian. But she had worked in law libraries already. I can't remember her history, but she was a very take-charge lady, younger than I, and she took me to my first AALL meeting, which was in Minneapolis. And we roomed together, and she really shepherded me around. Before we did have Connell, but we didn't have as well-developed programs as we do now.
Yeah, it was new in those days.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And you really do need shepherding around when you go to those conferences.
Especially even by then, when they had gotten considerably larger than they had been just a few years earlier.
Exactly.
It was harder to break in.
It was harder to break in, and not having had a previous paid profession, I had never been to a professional. Well, I take that back. I had been to rabbinical conferences with my father and my husband, but anyway, not in that capacity. And ever after that, up until her premature death from cancer, even when we lived in separate cities, we always roomed together at AA. And so I've been very fortunate, as you can see, with mentors.
Good. Well, sort of revisiting one of the mentors you mentioned, our viewers who watch very many of these probably are not too naive about how oral histories are done, know that we basically work out in advance a script, questions. And so I don't look like a complete idiot asking them, and you respond accordingly as well in a knowledgeable fashion. One thing that happened, though, is that I have had a reason for coming here to San Diego. This is December of 2016 that we're actually having our session today. And California is a place that I've only done a few of these oral histories so far, but I have plans to come through the entire state because there are a lot of colleagues along the way that we want to that I want to include, or we want to include in the history. But I did advance. I stopped here in San Diego as part of another trip to visit family in another part of the country at this point. And the primary reason was Carl Rubin was here in San Diego. He was somebody that we really wanted to include in the oral history. He was eager to be included, at least he told me this, but he was also very ill with cancer. And unfortunately, he died just about 2 weeks ago, if my memory serves me, on when you told me that he was no longer living. But before we started this morning, Ruth, you said that we could talk perhaps a little bit about Carl as a person. You might fill in a little background about him. And so I'm going to see if we can try that now, even though we're sort of off script for a few minutes. But you've been here at the University of San Diego since about 1992. So you and first Nancy Carroll Carter was the director, and then later Carl succeeded her when she retired.
Correct.
So you've worked with him for a number of years. You've already alluded to some of your experiences with Carl, including his somehow deciding that he'd serve nice warm beverages during finals. Something that I still have a hunch you had something to do with. But you want to try and tell us a little bit about Carl as a person? I know that this won't be the same thing as his telling his own story, but maybe we need to think in terms of that. I know that it's a tough time probably to do it because his loss is so recent, but would you be willing to try?
It would be a pleasure and an honor, of course. And no, I can't do it in Carl's voice because I don't have a Texas accent, and my voice is not deep enough.
My editing skills don't go to the far enough that I could create such a thing with your voice either.
Right. I think professionally, the unique thing about Carl is that he is one of the few, if not the only, no, not the only, but one of the few who has had a long and outstanding career both in the private sector and in the academic sector. Mm-hmm. So he is a Texan. He comes from a little town called Pampa. Mm-hmm. It's not quite as hick sounding as Taylor Fitchett's hometown, which is Bumpus, which is spelled bump ass, Virginia. Yeah, Carl comes from a kind of rural background in Texas, and he had many, many experiences over the years. I mean, he talked about serving in the military. He talked about working in the oil fields and a lot of other manual jobs that I probably can't remember now. But he did go to law school and to library school. He was, I believe, already a librarian at the time. he did them, I think, with the intention of continuing in librarianship. And he spent many, many years in private law firms, a lot of years in Vincent and Elkins in Houston, where he met his beloved wife, Linda McLeod. And then, after many years, he went to a law firm in Cleveland and served there for a number of years. And then I believe it was from there that he went into academia. And he went to St. Thomas in Florida.
In Florida, yeah, University
Yes.
of St. Thomas.
The University of St. Thomas. And I know that when he left there to come here, that the staff and the law school there were very sad to lose him. So I knew, even if I hadn't known personally that a wonderful gentleman was coming here, I did know him from AA, as well. And we had been looking for a couple of years for a director, and I had gotten so concerned that I actually offered to apply for the job myself, and did apply for the job myself. And I think it did come down to Carl and me. So, but I was not disappointed.
He got the short straw.
I was not disappointed at all. Well, he got the recognition he deserved, let's put it that way. And he was very kind. He made a trip here, I think, in sometime in the winter. But he began in July of the year that he began. But he came here in the winter on a trip, and I think his main purpose was just to have lunch with me and to say, "Are we okay?" And I assured him, that we were more than okay. And really, a lot of my purpose had been, you got to bring in someone who can do this better than I can, basically. And I think it did kind of encourage. The first year they didn't even go. The law school didn't even go to AA. So I think the whole situation encouraged them to give this job the attention that it deserved. I think they had been so used to Nancy's efficient running of the library for so many years that they, how it is.
They took it for granted, and the library would run just fine when she retired.
Right. So in any event, and I remember when Carl came in for his interview in his blue suit, and Carl was a tall man, and he had a thick shock of white hair and a white mustache and a ruddy complexion, and he was in his blue business suit, and I took one look and said, "This is going to be my new boss."
He had that professorial look about him.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it blossomed into a beautiful friendship. They say you can't do that as professionals, but I think when you're seasoned professionals, as we were, that we were indeed able to do that and do it very successfully for the years that he was here. So that we became personal friends. I became personal friends with him and with Linda. But we did balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. The job had been...
Sounds like a good team.
I think we were a good team. I think Carl felt we were a good team. The job had been expanded at Nancy's instigation to include technology, law school technology, in the official title. And also to be an associate dean, which position Nancy did not have, but she was instrumental in having it advertised as such.
That was the direction that many of the law schools around the country have taken with the library and the librarian having a little broader repertoire of duties,
Right.
overseeing technology, since it's so much a part of what we do as a library as well.
Right. And I think that Nancy was able to make the law school aware of that. And I think to make the job more attractive. And certainly Carl, who was, as a law firm librarian for many years, was self-taught in all of this technology, was really fit that role and really developed that part of the role to a great deal, and took many important positions in the law school and on campus as well. The IT people on campus really loved Carl and were so happy to work with him. And he worked on classroom technology and really all over the university. And so he gave us a tremendous credibility as technology leaders. And we have hired people who can hold up that end of the burden now, so that he prepared us very well for that. He also came, of course, just at the time of the decline in law school enrollment across the country, and the budget realignments. And to make a long story short, under Carl's leadership, we have given hundreds of thousands of dollars back to the law school, more than any other department. And we have done it through rigorous examination of the collection as a group, and without sacrificing access to any materials. You know, everything was scrutinized for its availability online, with the knowledge that, of course, that does give over power to the vendors, but that's a whole other discussion.
Well, they sort of had it anyhow, because you had to keep whatever you already owned up to date.
Exactly.
They were the source
That's
in
what
the
I
old
was.
days.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Exactly. But he did an outstanding job there, which I think will benefit his successor as we continue to look at cutbacks. No jobs were lost. And so, you know, but more than all of that, I think just Carl's style of management, which is a very respectful style, and of course a laid back. I mean, you can see Carl is, you know, looks like the definition of laid back, although let me tell you, he worries himself. He worried himself sick over things and over people, and a very kindly person.
He sounds like an ideal director. I mean, he came across in a supportive way when that was appropriate, but he worried as well to make sure that what was appropriate was what was going on.
Right. And I would say, with great respect and love, that Carl's only fault, or major fault, was that he never wanted to say no to anyone.
If that's a major fault, I hope others have the same major fault. I think that's the mark of a good director or a good leader, a good team.
Right.
Even.
Well, we had to, sometimes he put me in the role of bad cop to his good cop, because I had to do the, you know, the HR type of things. But we worked that out, and we balanced that out, and you know, I think, I know that people here are quite bereft now, because I think that all of us have lost a great dear friend, a great human being, and we miss him terribly.
Perhaps on that, and right before we go back on the original script for today's conversation, let me mention that I was in Houston, Texas about a year ago, and I did a number of these oral history interviews while I was there. And time and again, colleagues there would ask, are you going to get an interview with Carl Gruben? You know, he's out in San Diego now, and I said, well, I hadn't planned any trips out there for a while. But they said his story would well be worth adding if if he's available, and he is quite ill even then. And so that's when we placed him in sort of a higher priority to try and do earlier rather than later. Unfortunately, I waited a little too long, but so be it. But thank you, Ruth, for sharing as much about Carl this morning, because he was a gifted leader in our field from everything I know about him and from what I've heard, including in Houston a year ago. It's been a few years since he was there, but he was a real leader in that law library community for a long period of time. And from the private law firm sector, where often you don't see as much of that because they have other priorities for their time. But
exactly.
Somehow he found the time to do a lot beyond what most colleagues would be able to do for the profession as a whole. Well, to sort of go back on our original script now, I know you've been here since 1992, and I think you've already talked, especially in your introduction, about your role and how it's changed here, and you're now in a period of phased retirement, which is a wonderful time in life, in my opinion. And retirement especially is wonderful. Yes. But you're listed in the association, the bio about you is having taught courses in law librarianship, and I was intrigued by that because I don't see you as associated with a library school ordinarily, but could you talk a little bit about that, some of your teaching?
Well, in law librarianship, I taught back at my library school alma mater at the University of Kentucky.
Okay.
And
so you went across the bridge to northern Kentucky and taught
I
it there?
actually did. They took advantage of that. And actually, I believe that it was social sciences research. Mm-hmm. I don't think I was there long enough to get into teaching actual law research, but they asked me to do that. They up at the Northern Kentucky campus, and when you're young, you think you can do anything.
Well, of course, some of us who are older think we can still do anything. We're probably flat out wrong, but more so than we were when we were young, thinking we could do anything.
Right. So I did that. And I had one of those learning experiences there because to prepare for the course, I went over to the Langsam Library on the University of Cincinnati campus, which is the main library and a fabulous, fantastic library. And I studied their materials on the social sciences. And so when I taught the course, at least one of the students in the course was a librarian at the Langsam Library. And sadly, when it came time for her final project, she plagiarized those handouts. And so I had to deal with
that is always so difficult.
A really tough situation. Right off the bat. So that was difficult. And we both survived. We actually moved in some similar social circles too, so it was a very sticky wicket. When I came here, I taught advanced legal research. And again, not under ideal circumstances, because I was given that as an assignment with no real, there certainly wasn't any extra income for doing that. There wasn't any relief for from any of my
So you had your day job and then this.
and I had to teach advanced legal research to law students. And I did that for a number of years, and there were other sticky wicket situations. And I finally took the position that, law librarians here are not tenure track. Mm-hmm. It's funny because the librarians at the other library on campus are tenure track, and we are not, and that's a kind of a strange story. But I just decided that as someone without tenure, I was not being paid enough to put up with some of the difficulties from the students, and I was able to decline to do it anymore. Now, our Carl, who of course was a faculty member, taught the class and taught it, with a group of reference librarians, and they will be able, I think, to negotiate that with the law school. They're teaching other half-semester classes now, and it's just a much better environment.
You see that, I see it time and again in these visits, that this is how libraries have evolved in just the last few years.
Absolutely.
They're much more outreach in this formal fashion of teaching, as well as working one-on-one with faculty and others.
Absolutely, and the people these wonderful librarians that we have hired have just picked up that ball and run with it so fast that, I can see the dust. That they have left us in the dust, and they're just doing wonderful things with both of those.
It's nice on the cusp of retirement to see that you can start to let the younger ones evolve into some of these more advanced roles than they had before.
I feel that it's their library now, and I am honored to be here and watch this. I just think that's a unique position. In the beginning, they needed some procedural questions answered, and now they really don't. And so I can enjoy reference work and just watch it and feel great pride. There's a Yiddish word called kvelling, and kvelling is what a proud parent does at the accomplishments of their children. And I'm not their mother, and they're not my children, but I'm still kvelling.
Similar experience in
Yes.
some ways.
Yes.
Yes. Well, you have been involved in the broader profession beyond, of course, just here. You've done some publication over the years. Would you like to tell us a little bit about some of that?
Sure. It's been a while now, but in my younger years, I remember, it's funny, the ones that stick out. I remember there was an article for Criv Sheet that I was asked to write, and just to put it in context, Criv is the Committee on Relations with Information Vendors, and
Sometimes
it was
deals with touchy topics.
Yeah. Well, this one
Is
wasn't
that
touchy.
putting it nicely?
Well, this one wasn't touchy. This was about environmental law. And I remember writing it as as sort of an alphabet soup. That environmental law involved an alphabet soup, and going through the various acronyms and initialisms and talking about how to research these items. So I did various pieces like that. I did various pieces on government documents research. I enjoyed, I was actually the committee chair for the what was the AALL newsletter, which became the spectrum, and we handled that transition and the survey that led up to that. And I remember writing an article for Spectrum about myself as a mentor when I signed up for the mentoring program. And I had the thrilling experience of mentoring, of all people, Jesse Birchfield, who is now the director at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And what a little fireball she was back then. And I'm not quite sure who mentored whom, but later on we wrote a joint article about that experience. So I enjoyed that as well. On a more serious note, I had the experience in law school of being on law review. And so I had the assignment of writing a case note, and the case note was very technical, but that was actually a competition piece, because that's how, if we weren't in the very top 10% grade-wise, then you could write on to law review. And in those days, it wasn't a canned kind of thing. You actually were given a case, and you had to go out and do the original research and write the case note. And then mine got published. And my comment was also assigned to me rather than my choosing it, because it was an issue to honor a local legal and political leader whose name was Murray Seasongood. And he had been, I hope I'm correct, the first African-American mayor of Cincinnati before you did those things in the Almost South, which Cincinnati is the Almost South. But the article was about municipal liability, and I think the connection had to do more perhaps with his scholarship than with his work as a municipal official, but I don't remember that well. So a lot of really interesting, and now I have this fun little niche that I've carved for myself, that I write a column in the All Cis newsletter. And it's called Great Ideas from the Halls of Academe. And I do a little mini Pat Kehoe thing, and I call up directors, sort of just whoever comes into my mind, and ask them what they would like to publicize about their library, and we write a little article about that. So it keeps me in touch, and it keeps me writing.
Keeps you in touch, which is that's a wonderful
That's the main
thing at this point in life,
That's
too.
the main thing. Who will I call this month?
Yes, and I'll bet they're more than willing to provide you the material you need for your column.
Most of them will refer me to someone in the library who's got a great project going, and so I've met some wonderful younger
really
people as well. Yeah, it's great.
Well, you, beyond publication, and even this latest gig you're involved in, you've been active in the profession. I remember reading that when you were early on at the University of Cincinnati, you were involved in the AAUP, the professors' quasi-union.
Oh, yes, it was the union.
Yes.
It was the union, and I wish I knew how this happened, but somehow I got put on our contract negotiating team. I know how it happened. I wish I knew how this happened. Somehow I got elected vice president of our chapter of the AAUP. We were faculty in Cincinnati, and we had to go through the RPT process, and I had written up 2 dossiers to go through the steps and all, and I must have gone to some meetings, and somehow I ran for vice president. And so in my last year, my last couple of semesters there, I spent many mornings away from the library and involved in negotiations between the faculty and the administration. And that's really one of those things where I got out of Dodge just in time because after I left, they failed to arrive at an agreement. They went on strike for a week or two, and my colleagues were out there in the cold rain in Cincinnati walking a picket line, and then of course they settled it all. And I think I actually had to sign the contract. I think they sent it to me.
Because you were still on the roll, perhaps,
yes,
as
right.
a potentate of some sort.
Oh, it was all a happy blur. There are some things we like to block from our memory. But it was, again, good because you got in touch with the broader faculty at the university.
Well, I would hope you've had less trauma in your professional work as you've come out here. You've been treasurer at different points of both the San Diego Law
Yes.
Library Group and the Southern California
And SCAL,
Association.
Right,
You
yeah.
want to talk
I
a little about?
had to learn Quattro Pro.
Oh, did you?
That was before we were actually, I came out here, I would say really in the early years of automation of libraries. I mean, we were doing it at Cincinnati, and we actually were involved in the RFP, the request for proposals for initiating Ohio Link. Here at the University of San Diego, we had, for better or worse, decided on WordPerfect as our standard. And so when it came to becoming a treasurer, I had to learn how to use a spreadsheet, and I had to learn how to use Quattro Pro.
So you took that one instead of Excel, huh?
Yes, took that one instead of Excel. Of course, ultimately, there came a point when we had to morph over to Word and to Excel.
Yeah.
But
Most people have. I refuse.
oh, really?
Well, I can do things with WordPerfect that I just don't know how to do on Word.
Right.
And when I get into real trouble, I turn on Reveal Codes and fix the problem.
Exactly, and that's why we were hesitant to change, because of that. But I've been using Word products for a long time now, and I feel that makes me a loyal mother to my son who works at Microsoft, even though he has nothing to do with that. He's in their gaming division.
Well, it must somehow help keep his job going.
I'd like to think so.
Good. Well, you have also done a lot for ELL's committees. You've chaired a few. You've been on a few. I guess my question is, why, with your day job and for a while your second day job, you found it important enough to be involved in professional activities?
Well, fortunately, I did find it important, and my directors have always been very supportive of that. And I think they want you to do it as well. They feel that it enhances the reputation of the institution for people to do that. So I think I just felt that it was the thing to do. And then you get to go to these wonderful meetings. I remember the first New Orleans meeting that I went to, and it was the first of two. And I just, my jaw just dropped. That was just so much fun. And even though I had work, I was chairing the Government Relations Committee then. I think that doing that kind of work while going to this grand party gives you a sense of direction when you're there. And then a sense of relief when you can finish that and go to, all these interesting presentations. Mm-hmm. I would say that of all the things that I did, the one that remains in my mind with the most fondness was my work on the Diversity Committee. Mm-hmm. And I chaired that committee at a time when there was still, I believe, a full day given to, on the Saturday, to a diversity committee program.
Mhm.
And we did a program on legal organizations and what they are doing, you know, what the sort of drawbacks and challenges were to working with diversity. So we had, that was also in New Orleans. That was the second time I went there. And it was in one of their, it was post-Katrina. It was in a heavy rainstorm. My speakers had to like really wade through water to get off of their front stoops and to the convention center. And one was with a law firm, and that was very informative to people to understand what happens to diversity hires when they get to a law firm and they're stuck on every litigation that requires, you know, where the corporate client requires that even though it's not their area of interest, and they burn out. And we also had an admissions officer and I think a professor not at a law school. He was very charismatic, who worked with diversity programs in the academic environment. And I was, and they were wonderful. They were all wonderful. And of course, I got the kudos for putting it together, and I was really, really proud of that.
Well, if it hadn't worked out the way you wanted, you would have gotten the blame too.
This is
so
true.
You should get the kudos.
This is true. This is true. And we also had a reception afterwards, and then you have to get involved in planning the food. That's the worst part.
Oh, I agree. People with all their dietary restrictions
and the foods
preferences.
And the foods in hotels are so expensive.
Oh, it's terrible.
And you can't bring in outside food. So it's
well,
quite
that's
a challenge.
right. I mean, they catch you doing that. They have a monopoly they want to maintain.
Right, and if people ever knew how much you paid for that urn of hot water.
Well, I can still remember a story. I won't mention the name, but one of our colleagues, his library had a reception for many, many years at the annual meeting, and rather than pay the hotel prices, he sort of had catered it himself, including the liquor. And I don't know if someone blew the whistle or they just happened to catch him, but they basically did sort of like a raid. Confiscated all this stuff that was in the hotel that wasn't supposed to be there under the contracts.
Oh, my word.
I don't know what happened to the reception of the party, but it was an interesting story.
I know, that's great.
So you've been through it from that standpoint.
Right,
Well,
right.
why not?
Right.
Well, maybe on that basis, Ruth, we're probably nearing the end of our conversation today, but it's my custom to ask if there's anything we've not talked about that you'd like to mention. And not everybody has anything, so you don't have to come up with something.
Well, there's an image in my mind. It's just an image. And it goes back to my first AA-LL conference, where I said my friend Cynthia was shepherding me around. And I really don't know which part of the conference it was, but the president got up to speak. And here I have this image of this woman with this cap of golden, reddish golden hair. And with this dynamic personality. And her name was Penny Hazelton.
Ah.
And I just thought, that's a librarian. I'm so glad I've chosen this group.
Well, Penny is just recently retired herself.
Correct.
Yeah, and they have a permanent replacement at the University of Washington for her?
I have interviewed him for my little column
Yeah.
in the Alsace newsletter, but I think she's still running the library school.
She was running the program through last year, but now she's turned that over to somebody. I don't know, maybe she still teaches in it. That I don't know. This is all sort of breaking news.
Right. I
academic
just
year.
got it from the webpage, and sometimes it takes a while for the web pages to be
Yeah.
updated.
But Finney is still around and
Yes.
just as great as always.
Yes. Well, I think we're just lucky to have had such wonderful leaders over the year, and I feel very optimistic about the direction the profession is going in as I look at this younger generation and I see these long lists of new members of AALL every year. I think we're in great hands.
Well, I certainly share your view. I hope we're both absolutely right, too.
Yeah. And I hope I'm around for a while to
I'm
watch it.
also one of these unabashed promoters of our oral history because
Yes.
we've just talked about Penny Hazelton. She had the, I don't know if it's honor or whatever, of being the first person with whom I had one of these conversations for the oral history. So her story is part of our collection.
Well, this is a wonderful project. I've done a small similar project here at the law school, and it's just a wonderful way of preserving a history that I think is well worth preserving. And I think I've also been active actually in the Oral History Association. And I think the memories that get recorded just are precious.
It's a treasure trove of information. I have so much fun in editing this and basically reliving what
Yes.
I've talked about, what we've talked about.
Yes.
And there's also something I generally have the camera on outside of the interview itself to sort of get us organized. And sometimes the banter back and forth then is even in some ways more fascinating to me.
Right.
But as I agreed in advance with you and everybody else, if it's off, not out of the record, it isn't used.
Right.
It's the final version. But,
Right.
well, maybe on that, I should thank you, Ruth Levor, for talking with me this morning, taking time to do this. And in thanking you, I'm doing it not just on my own behalf, since I've had the pleasure of coming here and doing this session, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Odek, and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the honor of putting together an oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf portion of Hainan 1. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you and Frank and Michelle and Dick as well, all good friends. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.